Hi, this is Heidi Burgess, and today I'd like to talk about how one can identify and map the core issues in a conflict or a dispute. In the last video and a couple other videos, I compared the core conflict and the conflict overlays to this picture of the Earth. The notion is just like the Earth has a hot core and lots of layers of rock and liquid rock over the core, so too do conflicts. Typically, the core is made up of high stakes distributional issues. In other words, who's going to get jobs, who's going to get education, things that really, really matter. Identity issues, which are very fundamental human needs. Moral beliefs and values, rights, and fundamental interests and needs. Another way to put this is core conflicts tend to be about who you are, who gets what, and how you were treated. An example of how this plays out in the real world is the immigration conflict between Trump and the anti-immigration Republicans, and the immigrants and the pro-immigration, mostly but not entirely, Democrats. Let's look at the core issues that are driving both sides. On the Republican side, one of the core issues is security. There's been a lot of talk about how whites are going to become the minority race in this country. There's a fear that jobs are being lost as more and more immigrants are coming in and taking those jobs. There's a fear that their communities are changing, that their uniform, white, male-dominated society of the past is becoming much more complex, much more diverse, and that makes some people feel uncomfortable and threatened. So they are seeking security both in terms of their well-being and their jobs and their identity and their status, and they seek stability in their cultures and their communities rather than change. In terms of rights, they want to see the law enforced. They don't like the idea of people being able to come into this country illegally and work and hide and successfully pretend that they're American citizens. However, they're not really committed to rule of law. At least Trump isn't committed to rule of law, as he today, right before I made this video, I read that he's calling for the deportation of people who cross the border illegally without due process. So they're in favor of rule of law as long as it works in their favor. Their values are primarily fundamentalist Christian. That's an oversimplification, of course, but that's a big driving factor among the America First identity, and indeed the America First, oftentimes meaning white America or even male America first, is a driving value. And in terms of distribution, the key issue is probably jobs. They see their jobs disappearing as immigrants come in and take them. On the other side, the interests and needs are actually somewhat parallel. Security is the biggest one. The reason that immigrants are coming to the United States from Central and South America is because those societies are falling apart and they're war-torn and gang-torn, and the drug trade is leading to lots of violence, so people are feeling very insecure. The economies are not good enough to give good jobs to everybody, so they're coming to the United States to seek opportunity. They want respect and they want their identity preserved, but they want to be able to live here uh, safely and securely while maintaining their basic culture. As for rights, they want a rule of law, which means that they want fair process. They want the right to seek asylum, as our laws say they have the right to do. And they want to be able to gain, most of them anyway, want to be able to gain citizenship. Particularly, you'll see in the picture the sign about the Dreamers. The Dreamers are young adults and children who were brought to the United States by their parents when they were minors, and they're being threatened with deportation since they are not legal citizens. But there's nowhere for them to go. Many of them never knew the country from which their parents came, so they really don't have a home if they're deported. Values, most of the folks who are in the crosshairs of the immigration conflict now are Christian because they're coming from Central and South America. They value hard work and they value family. Not all that much different from what Americans value, but they are clashing nevertheless. And in terms of distributional issues, they're seeking education and jobs, just like the Republicans are, although I left education off the Republican side because that doesn't seem to be as much of a priority as it is for the immigrants. So if we were to put this in a map, the first map that I would draw would look something like this. And you'll see on both sides there's a concept of power, which I haven't mentioned. Both sides are looking to gain power and to use that power to gain their interests and needs and values and distributional goods. So in terms of the anti-immigrants, they're looking, as I said before, for security, for opportunity, for identity and respect and stability, and good jobs and U.S. benefits. And they think they're going to get this by having the most power. And indeed, with a President Trump in office, a Republican Congress, and a Supreme Court that's becoming increasingly Republican, the red side, that's the Trump Republican side, is gaining a tremendous amount of power. And the notion is the more power they have, the less power the other side has. Now, I put two new pictures on this slide of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who of course are leaders of the U.S. House and Senate respectively, on the Democratic side. And they, together with all of the American citizens who are supporting immigration, who are shown in the big picture on the right, those are the folks who are giving power to the immigrants. Should have put them on the left, I suppose, but they're on the right. So the immigrants are seeking security, opportunity, identity, and respect, education, good jobs. They want to support their family, and they think they need more power to do this, and they're right. But everybody on both sides agrees that the more power that the Republicans have, the less power the immigrants have. And if the immigrants gain power, particularly if they gain citizenship, the fear is that they'll vote Democratic and then the Republicans will lose power. So power is seen to be a negative relationship. The more one side has, the less the other side has. And in conflict maps, that's typically shown by a dotted arrow. So there's a dotted arrow going from the Republicans' power to the Democratic power, and there's a dotted arrow going back. Whoever has more, the other has less. That's the simple assumption, but it's not entirely true. Here's something that I would add to this map. And these are undotted arrows, which typically in conflict maps mean the more one side has of something, the more the other side has of something. So why in the world would I have this kind of relationship between security of each side? Well, it turns out that if the U.S. citizens feel secure and they have good jobs and they have decent education and they have the kind of communities they want, they're not going to feel such a need to fight against immigrants. They might even support immigrants, understanding that they're just looking for a better life, and many of them have skills that would be of value to the United States, and their culture is interesting, and we ought to let them in. It's the feeling of insecurity that makes folks want to keep other folks out. So the more security the Republicans feel, the less they're going to be lashing out at the immigrants, and the more security the immigrants will feel. So it's actually a win-win situation, or what's called a positive sum situation. The more one side has, the more the other side has at the same time. This is also true for opportunity, and the argument is exactly the same. The more opportunities one side has, the more opportunities the other side can have. So it's a win-win relationship. It's not a win-lose. And the same thing is true for respect and identity. If one side gives the other side respect, you tend to get respect back. Now, right now, we're seeing the opposite of this. Each side is treating the other side with gross disrespect. It's particularly Trump, who has been incredibly disrespectful of immigrants. And what's he going to get back? He's going to get disrespect in return, which makes him angry, and all the sides are continuing this, what is in this case a lose-lose relationship, where we're escalating the conflict and we're decreasing the stability for everybody. So the main point here, and this is my last slide, is that it's not simply a win-lose relationship where the more one side has, the less the other side has. There's different relationships for each of these elements within the interests, needs, values, and distributional benefits that each side is seeking and has. So by sorting this kind of thing out in a conflict map, you can figure out what the nature of the relationships are between the various entities and the various issues in contention, and you'll have a much better idea of how these various goods can be obtained in a way that benefits everybody. Next video, we'll talk similarly about conflict overlays. Thanks.